Good morning, everyone. During this last week, you've been taking a look at rocks and the rock cycle. Specifically, you've been looking at geology, the study of different kinds of rocks and minerals, how they form and where they are placed that constitutes the earth that we live on. And I'd like to take a closer look at one particular mineral, the mineral which we popularly call salt. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, in chapter 5, about verse 13, Jesus talked about us being the salt of the earth. And he went on to say, if the salt loses its savoriness, then it's not good for anything but to be thrown out onto the ground and to be stepped on. So what exactly is this thing called salt? Salt is one of the things that we tend to take for granted. We're very used to it. We talk about table salt, for example. And we use table salt all the time to flavor and season our food. But what is salt? Well, if we were talking chemically speaking, we'd be talking about something called sodium chloride, or NaCl. It's what we know as table salt. When you think about sodium chloride, sodium is actually a very reactive metal. If you put a little bit of pure sodium in water, you get a rapid explosion. On the other hand, chloride is actually a poisonous gas. It was used, for example, during World War I in the trench warfare. But when you put sodium and chloride together, they make a very stable bond that becomes a building block in our own health. And speaking of blocks, if I were to take sodium, salt, table salt, and say put it in my hand, and then if I were to take a magnifying glass, like the one that you see here, and I were to take a close look at what the shape of salt is, I'd actually see that, in fact, it forms these very cubical forms. This is the way that salt naturally breaks down. Salt is a lot more, though, than just a seasoning on our food, French fries or popcorn or mashed potatoes. Salt becomes a building block of our own lives. I mentioned the fact that yes, you can use it for food. Yes, we're familiar with salt being used, for example, on popcorn. We're familiar with salt being used to help make homemade ice cream. We're familiar with salt being used to help to de-ice a slippery sidewalk. But salt is also useful in our own bodies. When we think about adding it to food, for example, yes, it adds flavor, but a lot of the salt can be used as a preservative. And in a time before refrigeration, in Jesus' time, for example, salt would have been used to dehydrate food and to help it to be preserved. If you ever eat beef jerky, for example, whatever other flavors may be added to it, beef jerky is a salty food. We see salt being passed on in even some of the words that we use for describing food. The word salad, for example, S-A-L, that's the word salt. It was a group of leaves on which salt would be sprinkled. The word sausage, S-A-U, that was a meat that was ground up into which salt and other seasonings were added. Sauerkraut, S-A-U, that was a kind of cabbage that was ground up, and then enough salt was added to it that as it slowly broke down and decomposed, it actually was preserved in its own juices, and it kind of became a sour type of food. So salt is used for food. Salt is used as not only a preservative, salt can be used for health. Maybe if you have a sore throat, for example, your mom or your dad might recommend that you mix up a little bit of salt water and gargle it to help to reduce the irritation and to fight some of the bacterial infection. So salt is used for health as well. But salt is also used as a key building block in our bodies. When you think about the different things that our bodies tend to get rid of, we sweat, for example, or we might spit, we might cry tears. Virtually every kind of liquid that our body gets rid of, whether it's our sweat or our spit, our tears, our urine, all of these things are releasing salt. So if we're releasing salt, it's important that we also take salt in. And in fact, salt is a key building block in our body's ability to have our nerves smoothly run and communicate to our body muscles, and then for our body muscles to smoothly run to move our bodies. A lot of these salts that we take in, we might even call these, if they were in, say, some kind of a sports drink, we might call them electrolytes. And these are the very things that our bodies need to replenish, again, to help our nervous system to run smoothly and for our muscular system to activate smoothly. Because salt in water becomes a medium for electricity to run through the water. In fact, salty water conducts electricity about 1 million times more powerfully than just plain fresh water. So salt is critical to our body's lives. But how can salt lose its savor? Jesus talked about us being the thing that seasons the world. Jesus talked about us preserving the world. Jesus talked about us being something that helps to move the world. We have a powerful mission in flavoring the world. But how can salt lose its seasoning? Well, part of this is in the key mission of salt, and it's also a paradoxical truth. In order for salt to work, it has to lose itself in the mix. The danger is when salt easily loses itself in the mix, is it losing itself in the right mix or in the wrong mix? So, for example, in order for salt to be effective, and Jesus talked about as being the salt of the earth, it's important that we lose ourselves in the mission of bringing Jesus' kingdom to the earth. We can do that by giving ourselves away to others. Perhaps we have somebody in the family who is in need right now. Maybe it's something as simple as doing the dishes without being asked. Maybe it's something as simple as giving kind words to somebody instead of the cruel words which we could say or which we could even be thinking. Maybe it is doing some overtly active, loving action which there's a sacrifice on ourselves in order to do that. We saw that with, for example, the Good Samaritan. But salt can also lose itself because the nature of salt is that it's not in this natural white pure case. Usually salt and salt rock is found among other types of minerals. For example, here's a piece of rock salt, and let me see if I can't bring this into line here. Here's a piece of rock salt, and you'll notice that this rock salt is not plain white as you would normally see. In fact, there are a lot of other different kinds of impurities and minerals built into this. If you were to take a lick of this, you'd taste it like salt. But when you take a look at it, it's not the same as the kind of salt that you might see in your table shaker. The problem with salt is it easily dissolves in water. That would be true of this salt as well. But not all of the minerals in this rock salt are easily dissolvable or soluble in water. So it's quite possible that you could have, over the course of time, the salt dissolving out, leaving behind the impure minerals. It would look like salt, but it wouldn't actually be salt anymore. It's quite possible for us to be Christians in name, but we use all our energies for ourselves, or we use all our energies in ways that they might promote our career, they might promote our grades, they might promote our own reputation as a sports athlete or anything else, but they don't really promote Jesus' love towards a world in need. That would be one way that salt could lose its savor. Another way that salt could lose its savor is actually it doesn't season anything if it sits around in the shaker and never gets shaken out. It is possible for us to be Christians or to say that we're following Jesus, but we never actually do anything on Jesus' behalf. If all we do is go to church and go to Sunday school, but we don't actually allow Jesus' life to be lived out through our lives, we don't actually season anything, we can lose our ability to season. So that's one possibility. And then, like I said, another possibility is that if we lose ourselves, but we lose ourselves to all the wrong things instead of to allowing Jesus to live through our lives, that also is another way where we can lose our seasoning. So it's important that we do lose our seasoning by allowing ourselves to be given away, but that we give ourselves to each other. We give ourselves to Jesus and allow Jesus to live through our lives. Couple of thoughts on Jesus' words about salt as you wrap up your section in science this week on geology and the study of rocks and the rock cycle. Until next time, bye-bye.